1829, Jacob Sigler came to what is now Frankton. He and others cleared the 80 acres that make up the town. During the process of clearing, the father of Frankton, Jacob Sigler, made his residence in a large hollow sycamore tree on the banks of Pipe Creek. This residence was only for a short time, as a log house was soon built, where Jacob resided for many years. To claim the 80 acres, Jacob had to ride on a horse to Fort Wayne, the nearest government office. At dark, Mr. Sigler made camp at about the halfway point. He began to prepare a dinner and built a fire. The smell of the meat attracted hungry wolves. Soon the air was pierced in every direction by their howls. He immediately built a larger fire, and gathering up the burning limbs, started swinging the branches and yelling at the top of his voice. The wolves left, and Jacob went to sleep. Frankton was laid out March 3, 1853, by Francis Sigler, oldest son of Jacob Sigler, and was named in his honor.
What about the history of Frankton? Is this what you want to know?
I can just see all those buildings, in my head. Haven't been there for years.
They'd advertise on the radio, but of course it wasn't any television then.
That's a lot of businesses and things over a period of years. And some of them was here before my time, and some of them was here after.
It's just like they are now.
The only place I ever got a pop for a nickel.
My nephew said to me one day, he said, Uncle Sheriff, if you didn't tell us about these things, we would never know them.
Gas was discovered in 1893. Everyone was talking gas, and we certainly had it good and plenty. The supply seemed exhaustless, and of course, glass factories were soon attracted. Houses were built everywhere, which caused an increase in population. It jumped from 600 to 2,500. Property advanced, and people began to locate here from all over the state. This condition lasted about 5 years. Gas began to decline in 1898, and by 1905, not a producing well or factory remained. Had there not been trains bringing travelers through twice a day, most of the businesses in Frankton may never have been started.
We came here, train went through the town of Frankton, went from Chicago to Cincinnati.
First, the railroad was constructed and just came from Richmond, or from Cincinnati to Richmond, and Richmond on up to Anderson, and then went off there. But later then they added the section of track from Anderson to Logansport through Kokomo, and then when they got to Logansport, well then that they already had the tracks there, and going into Chicago. So here we had good rail service from Cincinnati to Chicago, and when we were here, when we first came, trains were stopping here every day to pick up passengers and take them here, take them there.
They go through Frankton real fast, 60 miles an hour, 2 times. And one time they hit a car, killed one young gal, just senior in high school. Several others were in the car, were injured.
Remember when 2 or 3 train wrecks there at automobile and train there in the main part of town. Several.
Well, yeah,
car
there's several other
accidents there.
train accidents. Two men killed at one time.
Trains went through there pretty fast. Of course, that back, then
They
they finally
did.
put a light right in the middle of the street. They had flasher lights there. They never did have, guards come down. It was just a flasher.
we used to stand downtown and watch when the mailman would go out, and they had the mail train, and of course they would throw the mail back out, and he would get his little thing and grab it. That was big fun to watch, you know. Good time.
Pick up mail,
Stopping.
and put the mail in a bag, and they put a hoop wire on the bag, and when the train would go through town, the guy would hold his arm out and run it through the hoop, metal hoop, and jerk the bag. He had to really hang on. He'd have probably a heavy glove on his arm, so it wouldn't hurt him. Pick up the mail that way, so they didn't have to stop.
The railroad brought many businesses to Frankton. Although no gas-related businesses remained, there were still enough businesses left to keep the town thriving.
There used to be 2 elevators in Frankton. One part of it is still there, and one was across the street by the railroad track, where the welding shop is. There used to be a farmer's elevator there, where they bought grain and sold things to the farmers. Is the other one they ground feed, where they bring their corn and oats and in a wagon, they grind feed, put it in sacks, and take it back to the farm. So these businesses, which used to be here when we came here in '69.
And I grew up on a farm. Dad farmed for a lady named Jessie Todd, about 3 miles out of town. And as a boy, I would go with Dad to the elevator to take our stuff in the fall, our grain, and in there for them to weigh it and pay us. And I really remember that because it's like we was there a lot. And after they would pay Dad, we'd step over in the corner, and they had a pop machine in there, and there was an old crank type, and the pop was only a nickel. The only place I ever got a pop for a nickel.
Located where Versatile Welding sits today was Ermston's grain elevator.
I didn't know much about it when it was Ermston. But after Ermston sold it, he sold it to Wilbur and Holland. And I did know both of them. And they had a great big elevator there, but it burned.
Just north of the 2 elevators was Washington Street.
The Legion, and of course Bernie's Bar was all, when we came here, it was Brownie's Bar, where they had beer and sandwiches, and people go there. And then many places in between Bernie's and the Legion.
In the early 1900s, there was a blacksmith shop just down the street.
About the blacksmith shop that used to be there when I was a kid. There was a blacksmith shop where the Christian church is. Well, there was a blacksmith shop in between my house and the church. I was just a kid, and I used to go there and watch him, shoe the horses. And we'd watch the sparks fly, and he'd say, stand back, His name was Hughie Hicks, and he was the blacksmith. And I would go down there and stand and watch him, do that.
Of course, back then, the blacksmith made the shoes and all.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they
Things.
buy them
Well,
already.
it was horse and buggy days,
Thracian
See, I was
days.
born in 20, so they were still using horse and buggies a lot.
After automobiles caught on, many gas stations were built in Frankton.
Service station. A service station. I think that there, at one time, there were 4 or 5 service stations, and that was back before too many automobiles. But anyway, across from the Wesleyan Church, there on that vacant area, across the street from that, there was a Shell filling station there. And then there was a Mobile, Standard, and then up here by the funeral home, there where that liquor store is, there was won't need to mention it's not a liquor store. But there was a cure station there. And then there was something out here where the Rickers are. There's another filling station there. But now they don't have any, those were service stations, and you could go and get a tire fixed if you had a, or if you were having some trouble with if your fan belt broke and or something like that, why you could go to a service station and get it taken care of. But now, all that you get from the service station is gas and oil.
Brought by the natural gas boom were many types of factories.
You know, where the railroad station is, that building there, on down beyond that, probably a block, there was a glass factory there. And I've forgotten what their specialty was. I know that we used to go over there and pick up pieces of glass, molten glass, and it was sort of a green glass, so I imagine that it must have been fruit jars or something that they manufactured. Yeah, there was the glass factory was there, and then there were two canning plants that were there. One was on the west side of the railroad, and the other one was on the east side. But there were two back there.
Yeah, I think there was still one canning factory over here on the road that was right next to the railroad track. One that's on an angle. There was still a canning factory out there when I moved to Frankton. My dad had at that time it was Standard Oil block plant. It was right next to the canning factory. He delivered gasoline and fuel to the farmers around Frankton.
Many restaurants have come and gone over the years in Frankton.
And there's our Braddock Restaurant. That was a restaurant that was located right there by the that little angling street that goes along the railroad. It angles parallel to the railroad a little ways. It was right the first building in that, a good-sized restaurant. And you could get a meal in there for 25 cents.
There was also Braddock's, I'm not sure whether it had a name, it was just Braddock's Hamburger Shop. It was where the dentist's office is, next to the post office. I mean, it wasn't the cleanest place in town, but they probably had the best hamburgers in Indiana. I mean, everybody went there for hamburgers.
It was a good restaurant. And Henry Restaurant was where it still is, up in the east part of town.
Grandma's.
Grandma's Restaurant.
Business was booming even in the smaller parts of town.
Mentioned in one of these about the hotel, but down here where the KFP women had the Knights of Pythias had their meetings, that was a hotel at one time, and this is history. The town drunk, well, go back further, down drunk. They were getting ready for a 4th of July celebration here in town. This year's goal. But I think that there, in this book, I think that there is a picture of the building as it was. But anyway, it's two or three stories. But anyway, this town drunk, he was walking along there and smoking a cigarette, and he flipped the cigarette. Well, they had this fireworks all set up for night, and when he threw his cigarette, why it landed in one of those areas and started a fire, and those rockets landed on the roof, and it burned the top story of that building off. And how they got the fire out, I don't know. We're going to say it would have been quite a fire. But anyway, that's all that I can tell you about the hotel. There used to be a row of buildings along the railroad, and come out there where the little Boy Scout's little building is. There were 4 or 5 small buildings there. One of them was a cleaning establishment, and one of them was a paint store, and it seems like there was a third something in there besides that little house, and I don't know what that house was.
Sigler Street, named appropriately for the town's founders, is Frankton's main street. Most of the businesses were located here, and even today, it is the busiest part of town.
We used to have a veterinarian, there where the city building is, there where that mobile deal is. Veterinarian used to have his office right there. And then the doctor's office was down where that brick house across from that liquor store. That was the MD. And King had there where well, you know where Jack's barber shop is. One house, and then the second house, the one on the corner, that used to be King's funeral home. And King had funeral home there, and then George Harper had his across the street.
There was the bar, there was the American Legion, there was, where the vacant lot is across from the railroad tracks, across from the post office, or what used to be the railroad tracks. There used to be a bank, and a grocery store, and Jack Track Barber Shop was there.
We had a drugstore, there was a drugstore here, but when we came, there was not a drugstore, but it was called a package store. The pharmacist was not a registered pharmacist, and so they just sold over-the-counter drugs, aspirins and things of that particular nature. But there in that package store, they had a soda fountain, and that was after school. That's where the youngsters would all head for downtown to the package store. There they would get something cold to drink. And but those are a
Do you
few.
remember some of the businesses in Frankton?
Yeah, had Lamb Basie had a grocery downtown. Well, John Ackerman had the grocery first, I'm sorry, and then when he retired, Lamb Basie bought it out. Of course, Harper's had the furniture store. Harper's had the funeral director. He was the funeral director here in town. There was a Shell station downtown. And the biggest thing, I think, was probably the package store. I mean, we would probably call it a drugstore, even though they didn't dispense, they got over-the-counter drugs, but not prescription drugs. The neat thing about it was after ball games, you'd always go in there and get a black and white sundae, because the man that worked there made up his own chocolate syrup. It was great. It was great.
There was a Frankton Hardware. And I think down there now, there's where the American Legion had that new metal building. The old Frankton Hardware was there, and we'd have to go get things there. Back when I was a kid growing up, we didn't have all these Walmarts and Kmarts and things, so the Frankton Hardware, we'd run down there and get nails, and if we break a tool or something, that's where we would go.
The hardware burned.
Thank you, Friends Hardware Store.
Yeah. It was a big hardware between the garage and the building on the corner. A big hardware. Sold all kind of heating stoves years ago. Heating and these little iron stoves, kitchen stoves. Sold everything in there. And his name was Friend. And that was a big store, wasn't it? But he handled all the things that they, back then, that they used. And he was just a little guy. All the guy I ever heard was Dinky Friend. Now, surely it wasn't his name. You think so?
No.
I wouldn't hardly think so.
I don't know.
But anyway, that's what all I ever heard.
In the 1930s, the Depression hit small communities especially hard. In 1933, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, was established to provide work for unemployed young men. They helped the town by doing outdoor labor and landscaping of the whole area, while at the same time were paid and housed by the government during the Depression.
But one of the things that touched the town and the community more than anything else was this CCC camp that we have mentioned, or a youth work camp, which occupied the ground where the present high school, that's all this land over across the street here, where that stands. And as I said before, it was something in the mind of President Franklin D. Roosevelt to start that. And it was hard for boys to get a job that was worth much while. And so he organized that, and so there were about 200 to 225 boys lived in 3 barracks over across the street here. And along that 8th Street over here, that's where the dining hall, or the mess hall, is located. But the boys' dormitories were down along here. The bathroom facilities were just right across the street here, in this area where the athletic building is located. And but anyway, that was there. But these boys would go out and they would work on erosion. If it hadn't been for the CC's camp, all of this area around here would have been like it is down in Brown County. There's hills and gullies and things like that. But they came in there and they would fix little dams across these gullies and fill it in with dirt, and then they'd drive saplings from small trees. They'd cut them down, and then they'd use the sticks from those trees, stick those down on the ground, and then put more earth in to hold the dirt. And that was one of the things that they did. And then, of course, they did a lot to take care of ditches around in the area. And some of those went as far away as about 40 miles. They would go that far to do their ditch work. But practically every creek and stream and other tributaries was handled by these boys, or was taken care of by these boys. And then the boys got something else besides their salary, which was meager. They got $30 a month, I guess it was. And when the payday came, why, the boys would get half of that, $15, and the other $15 was sent to the parents. And so the parents could either spend it for themselves, and most of them needed it. And the boys were largely poor boys that wouldn't have had anything. But here they had the comfort of good place to sleep, and had good food. And but the boys, I say, in addition to getting a salary, many of them got wives while they were here. And so many of the grandchildren of the kids that I've had in school were, well, their grandparents lived, the grandfather probably was one that worked here in the 60s.
In 1960, the current Frankton High School was built on the grounds of the old CCC camp. Before construction of this school, all Frankton students, kindergarten through 12th grade, went to the old elementary school, built in 1922, located on Sigler Street.
I started school here in 1948, and at that time I thought it was a huge school. They had all 12 grades, no kindergarten. The basement, and I'm talking about the school that was on Sigler Street, so most people don't know about that. The basement and the top floor, those were the high school rooms. And the middle floor, those were the elementary rooms. And in the school year 48, 49, I think there were 10 high school teachers, 7 grade school teachers. There were 2 first grades.
Of course, the Frankton School used to be in an organization with Highland. Highland High School. I forget what they call it, the school corporation anyway. And Anderson took over the Highland School, and then Frankton joined up with LaPel. And of course there was a movement years ago, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to move the high school out of Frankton down towards LaPel and consolidate LaPel and Frankton. And I know that was quite a row.
Because we had a basketball team, we had a band, we probably had maybe 30 kids in the band. Greta Boston was our director. We wore purple capes, and the boys wore white pants, and the girls wore white skirts. And we kept the color purple and gold until, probably until the new high school. Muff Davis didn't really like that color for his ball team, so we changed it to red and white.
And I remember going to basketball games with my sister. She was in pep club, and I think it was about 65 or 66. They had a real good year. There were some guys on there by the name of Waymar and Stoudemire, and they were really good. And I still remember today those guys playing.
And I remember in gym class, the girls had to wear one-piece, starched, blue short outfits. And, oh, they were horrid because you'd have to wash them and they'd be all yucky and trying to get them wet. And we really girls basketball that we played once in a while in gym class, but since I didn't think girls had the stamina to run, we could take 2 steps and then had to pass the ball. And you had your, we didn't have proms. I think in 1952 or 53, they finally let the kids go over to Linder's on the Point, and they had a disc jockey and had a banquet, I guess, a dinner, and some of the girls danced together and the boys sort of sat and looked at each other. But as far as proms and big things like they had now, we didn't have that at all.
We hated to see the old school go down, or she hated it worse than I did, 'cause I went to Linwood grade school over here at Linwood. We'd go down and watch them tearing it down, and she wouldn't want it.
I didn't want to see
The
it.
old
I told
school.
her, I hid my head. He wanted to see it. I said, I don't want to look. I don't want to see it.
Sat there and watched them when they took the big chimney down to stand up itself, and they had this big backhoe, and they'd clamp onto a piece of iron and then stick away out there so that if it fell up toward it, it wouldn't fall on the equipment.
Of course, that was
It was
just,
interesting
what,
to
2
watch.
years ago?
Yeah,
Just a couple of years ago. Yeah, I hate to see that go down because that was always there, you know. And I went,
I feel that our youngsters here have an opportunity for a good education. They don't need to go to Anderson or someplace larger to go to school. They can get what they need right here. I felt that they've always had good teachers. So the schools, that would be one of my top things. And then since they built this new one out here, that's state of the art, they call it.
Other civil organizations in the early town included several churches, many of which still remain today.
And of course the churches in Frankton, the Methodist Church, used to be right down here on the corner. And it was started in 1836. Christian Church, our church, was started in 1839. The other churches, Church of the Firstborn and the Wesleyan Church. The Wesleyan Church used to be the Pilgrim Holiness Church, and is now called the Frankton Community Wesleyan Church, I believe. And then the Disciples of Christ Church is out south of town, south of the restaurant. People in Frankton, you know, the most important thing in the community is the people and the businesses and, you know, the institutions that make a community, the school system, post office, restaurants, churches. It was a pretty good, thriving town.
I was homecoming king,
booming town.
There was 2 tennis courts there, because I helped build them.
Downtown was pretty active.
His street is the way that you interpret it.